BibleWorm, BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and the founding pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week, we read about the original Passover ritual described in Exodus 12 and 13. We think about the mix of urgency and powerlessness that the Israelites may have felt, each in their own homes, just as we may feel today. We consider the ways in which ritual can form us and prepare us for what's next, even when we can't see around the pike. And we call out the losses and sorrows that accompany the struggle for liberation. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Bobby. How are you today?
Hey, Amy, I'm good. How are you?
I am doing pretty well.
We're going to have a little Passover action today.
We are. And it's so funny. I was preparing this text and all of a sudden I started having this is it Passover time? Is it spring? Because I don't know what season it is. All my cues are gone.
Yeah, as time is a big blur.
Yeah.
And it's Passover in October.
Yes. So yeah, you'll need to keep reminding me that this is not an immediate instruction for me. I don't need to go out and slaughter a lamb today.
Okay, good.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Good, yeah.
Okay, I need to lay out the goal for this podcast.
Okay.
Which is this episode. Before we started recording, Bobby said, and I quote, "By the way, there is one thing that I'm thinking that's really important, but I can't remember what it was." End quote. So our goal is to somehow bring up this buried treasure from Bobby's brain.
I have no idea what it is, but I am sure that it's impressive.
It's buried.
Yeah, it's
buried. So we're going to work on it. And at the end, you can let us know if you think we got it or not.
Oh, no, don't do that. Then it'd be like, well, that was a 35 minutes of non-brilliant.
That was disappointing.
That could not have been.
But then we know it's still out there. So it's good. Movies are built around these things. So I was going to make a movie one day.
What is the thing in Bobby's head that he can't remember?
What is the thing in Bobby's head that's really important?
But he doesn't know what it is.
But he doesn't know what it was. Maybe you know what it is. Okay, great. Perfect. I like a goal. We have a goal. We're as we started off saying, we're reading about Passover today.
Yeah.
But we skipped some parts.
We did.
Passover. Last time we met, we were talking about Joseph.
Yes.
What do we need to know that will get us roughly from the Joseph story to Exodus 12, where we will pick up today?
So with the Joseph story, as you know, Jacob and his sons, Israel, end up in Egypt, and Joseph becomes powerful, the second hand to the Pharaoh. It helps Egypt survive the famine. But then the book of Exodus begins by telling us there's a new Pharaoh who doesn't know or remember Joseph. And so now you've just got the Israelites are in Egypt, and the Pharaoh has no real knowledge or compassion towards them. And so as the Israelites grow, the Pharaoh becomes more and more concerned about their power, and so decides to enslave them and force them to build cities for him, and then eventually decides to kill the male Israelite children who are born. And then when the midwives kind of subvert him through their witty repartee, their active nonviolence, then the command is to throw the male children into the Nile River. So we've got this oppressive situation in which the firstborn Israelites are in jeopardy. Then God raises up Moses, who grows up in the house of Pharaoh, and then flees away to Midian after he kills an Egyptian, and he's afraid for his life. And then God has called Moses back from Midian to Egypt to force Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. And we've had this series now of 9 plagues that God has enacted against the Egyptians. Pharaoh's heart has been hardened, sometimes by Pharaoh and sometimes by God. So Pharaoh has become very stubborn. And so we sort of ratchet up the tension to the 10th plague, which is going to be the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians.
So the narrative lectionary gives us two sections today, one from Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 13, and then one from Exodus 13, verses 1 through 8. Chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby, in proportion to the number of persons. You shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of the month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight." So this text starts by telling us that this is going to be the new year.
I think it's such a profound thing, especially at the beginning of this text. Like, God has not said yet what is about to happen. And to say, this thing that is about to happen is going to reset time for you. And it's going to be so important that you need to start your calendar here from now on.
Yes.
Now, once you see what has happened, right, this is the exodus from Egypt. This is like after this plague, this is going to become the Israelites are going to escape from Egypt and reconstitute themselves as the free people of Israel. And so you kind of understand, here's why this is going to be the first of the years, because this is the day you were kind of reborn as a people.
Right,
but at this moment, if you imagine
if
you're living through this text and God is like, okay, this thing that's going to happen is going to reset your calendar. Now let me tell you about it. Like, that's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah. So if this is the new year, then every month forward from here is marked as it is now X months since this big thing happened, since the day of freedom. But they don't even know it's the day of freedom yet.
Right.
It's just, this is epic, people. Prepare yourselves.
Yeah, I was trying to imagine, like, what would happen. Like, what would you even think if someone sort of said to you, tomorrow, this day that's coming up is gonna, from now on, you're gonna remember this as the beginning of everything.
Yeah.
And like, how would you even sort of start to anticipate what that was gonna be like?
Yeah, I know. My husband said the other day that, like, we tend to refer to before the pandemic now as like the before times.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm starting to do that unironically. Like, it really does seem it was, things were so fundamentally different, and the type of difference trickled down into every manner of daily task. Like, everything looks different. Your whole mindset's different. Everything is different. You watch TV shows and you're like, you can't do that anymore. I mean, you can't do what they're doing in the TV shows. Right. You sure can watch TV shows. You watch a lot of those. Yeah. So really having that marker right here in the biblical text is pretty profound.
Yeah.
So then we get instructions about a lamb.
What do you make of this? If a household is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join its closest neighbor in obtaining one. So I'm of two minds about it.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you think. One way of reading it is if you are too poor to afford your own lamb. And one way of reading it is if there's not enough people in your family to actually consume a lamb. How do you think we should read that?
That's a good question, because it does become important later that no leftovers. You have to eat the whole thing in one night. So I read it as a very practical instruction, but I think it's practical in both ways. One is that, like, a household might not have a lamb. If they're a small household, they could be small in wealth in addition to number of persons. So I don't know. I guess I read it as both, but I read it as like exceedingly practical. And then the additional instruction that each household should contribute for the lamb according to what their household will eat. Like, you're going to divide up the bill.
Yeah.
This is like the original, restaurant receipt, and you have to figure out what everyone ordered and divide everything up and add the tip. And, I think it's fascinating that the Torah pauses here to tell you divide the cost equally.
Yeah, I love that. And, I think there's something happening here about the way in which God's economy is an economy of like community sharing, and everybody's got what they need. Nobody has an overabundance. And even in this moment of crisis, and maybe there's something about it, like exactly that the crisis is because of overconsumption on the part of the Pharaoh. And here is this kind of counter model where overconsumption is exactly what we're trying to avoid. I just think that like it's sort of entering into this sort of economic conversation with these very practical descriptions of sharing equally among families.
I love that. And I would add to it the importance that you're not just giving some of your lamb to the neighbor.
Right.
Like there's a sense that you should own, for lack of a better word, the portion of the land that you've consumed. You know, and it reminds me of like Abraham purchasing the cave at Machpelah, like Abraham's the importance to him that there's ownership here.
Yeah.
And the importance in this text that there's ownership, even if it's just ownership of a fraction of a lamb.
No, I like that a lot. So everybody owns part of the lamb, but nobody owns more than they need.
Yeah.
I like that.
So what do you make of the fact that it has told us that they're supposed to get this lamb on the 10th day of the month? That's back in verse 3. And then it says, keep watch over it until the 14th day of the month.
Yeah.
Why is there this like 4-day watching period?
Yeah, I was struck by that when I read this text too. That so you get the lamb and it becomes like, you know, like Lammy, the little pet lamb. Like you could imagine like if you have small kids in your house, like they're super attached to this lamb.
Yeah.
You know, it's such an interesting, instead of like go to the market, buy a lamb and slaughter it or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have sort of two, like the very practically speaking, you know, just like make sure that you've got the lamb 4 days ahead in case something goes wrong. It's like buy your Thanksgiving turkey, you know, at least by Sunday.
Right, before they run out of turkeys.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so it has time to thaw out or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, part of it seems like that. But then I think there's something else going on there where this lamb becomes part of the household. And so when it then is sacrificed, like you're sacrificing something that has some personal connection to you. I have some students at Hendrix who are Muslim, and so in the practice of Eid al-Adha, they also have a lamb that they keep and then they slaughter, and they remember that from their childhood, like, oh, I had this lamb and I took care of it, and then we killed it and we ate it, and there's this kind of like there's a connection for them in a really personal way, and I imagine something here is happening similar. You become attached to this lamb, you know, just a little bit, like 4 days worth of attachment,
right?
And then and so you're sacrificing something of your own. What do you think about that?
I think that that's right on what you're saying. And I'm aware that, you know, this is a more agricultural society. So whereas for me, I mean, if you tell me you're going to keep an animal for 4 days and then sacrifice it, I'm picturing like my dog. Because I don't have, you know, like, which is a really different, that's not what they're saying. Don't sacrifice your dog. But it does also say here, like, you shall keep watch over it. Like, it's not even just like, put it out in the yard. Like you need to take special care of this animal, in part so that it doesn't become blemished. Like that's part of sacrificial norms, is that the animal you sacrifice needs to be unblemished. So you need to have taken special care to keep it safe. But of course that would have the effect of forming a different kind of relationship with that animal. And I think especially in a text that is like surrounded by this idea of the loss of the firstborn, which is very different, of course, than the loss of a lamb you've had for 4 days. But that kind of personal investment in its care seems important.
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's a ritualizing of this, you know, the loss of a member of the family, which is going to show up over and over again. And one way of reading it is that that's sort of a ritualization of that process. And you're right. I mean, it's not the same thing. By far, it's not the same thing. But there is this sort of sense of here is a small way that one can kind of recreate the sense of loss. And if you're thinking about this ritual going forward for generation and generation and generation, then you've got to, like in the moment of the Exodus, you don't have to recreate that sense of loss. Right. But in, you know, 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 years after the Exodus, you might have to recreate that sense of loss on a small scale, just to kind of remember what it was about. Yeah,
to have some nod towards the emotional experience that of this event they're recounting.
So the one other thing that I'm sort of looking at is On the 14th of the month, the whole congregation shall slaughter their lamb at twilight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just such a, like, this is different than like the temple, where there's sort of a priest who is ritually slaughtering a lamb, and there's kind of, you sort of imagine there's a sequence happening. This is just like at this same moment, every family in Israel is going to slaughter a lamb. And there's just something about that kind of that moment of slaughter that seems really striking to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything to do with that. It just seems like, death is hovering around this text in all kinds of ways.
It's really interesting to think about sort of the potential impact on the people of this, like in the sense in which it might, again, sort of double down on their sense of peoplehood because they're all having this experience at the same time. And it's a really profound, embodied.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what it's like to slaughter a lamb, but it's a lot more complicated than just reading these words, slaughter a lamb, you know?
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I don't know what I really believe about all this stuff, but if you try to think about it cosmically, like this moment of like the entire people of Israel, which the text has told us is a lot of people. That's why Pharaoh's concerned in the first place.
Right.
Slaughtering this lamb they've been caring for at the same time. That really, that feels cosmic. That feels like it would shift the energy in a space or sort of play into the shifting energy that is in a place. Yeah. Ooh, that just got a little dark, Bobby.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for
Took
real.
us got a little dark. So picking up in verse 7, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it. So things get really sort of, for lack of, I think this is the technical term here, ritually.
Yes, yeah.
It really sort of moves into the realm of like, this is not mundane activity. This is not something you might just do as a household. It was already, there were a couple of things that marked it in the first place, but now we're like smearing blood on doors. What is, I guess, of the various things we could and will talk about in here, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the blood on the doors? Or is there something else that speaks more loudly to you?
I think the blood on the doors is a good place to start, and partly because some of the ritual stuff escapes me in a way. Like you think about ritual in a more deep way than I do. But thinking back to Exodus 1 and 2, like the Israelites have already lost their male children. And so there has been blood shed already among the Israelites. And so one way of reading what's going on is to say, look, this blood on the door is a symbol of the blood that we have already shed. And so no more blood is required of us, or something like that. One could, I suppose, also read the blood as just having kind of an apotropaic sort of function where angels of death come through and see blood and they sort of steered away
like the blood
from those
itself,
houses.
right? Like the blood itself has some sort of magical quality about it that is protective.
Yeah. Or I suppose one could think of blood as being the stuff of life. And so in that sense, the angel of death is going to not pass through the blood of life because that is, those houses are marked for life and not for death. So those are kind of the 3 things that occur to me about the blood on the doorpost. I'm not necessarily persuaded in any of those ways, or maybe it has some, this is the thing about ritual, right? Is there's never any kind of one-to-one, like this is what that means. What do you think about that blood on the doorpost in particular?
I want to start with the last thing you said, which is that part of what's so powerful about ritual is sort of the more you try to nail it down and say, like, what exactly does this mean? And we're going to articulate it once and for all time. That causes it to lose some of its power. Like, I think part of what's so powerful about ritual is that it has all of those resonances, and so we should be mindful to think of what are the resonances for this time as opposed to our time. But even within this biblical time, whether we're thinking about the author's time or this, whatever, this general worldview, blood has a lot of resonances, and there is part of Leviticus that talks about blood as life. So it certainly could be life in that way. We do have some reason to believe there were surrounding ancient Near Eastern rituals around the beginning of the shepherding season that would have involved this like apotropaic, I don't say that word very often, apotropaic function of blood as having like a magical quality in itself. The other resonance for me, and again, the text does not say this is what you're doing. It doesn't tell you why you're doing it. But is once we get into the desert and we have the tabernacle and we're performing sacrifices at the tabernacle, you manipulate the blood. Like that's part of what the sacrifice is. And the blood is smeared on the altar. Yeah. Typically, or sprinkled toward the Holy of Holies where God is most present in the sanctuary. And again, there's plenty of debate about why that is happening. I tend to follow Bill Gilders in thinking that blood is seen in that context as sort of like a detergent, as something that like cleans the filter between Israel and God so they can have a good and clean interaction between them. But this text does not tell us that any of that is happening. I mean, it seems much more like the simple, what you were saying, that you're marking your house as a house of Israel, and a house of Israel that has followed this imperative, right, and is doing the thing. But I want to pick up a little bit later when we'll get there in a few verses. You keep saying it's the angel of death who's passing through, so just hold on to that.
Oh, is it not?
Thought? Well, no. It's just a more complicated question.
Oh, it is. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I will pass through. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know I don't think there is one singular resonance or one singular meaning for what that blood on the doors is. But it's certainly a memorable thing to do.
Yeah, to me, that's one of the things that's really striking about this is like there is some urgency, or at least perceived urgency in this situation. Yeah. In which, there's about to be this, there's about to be an exodus. And it's not entirely clear at this exact moment whether the people know that or not. Yeah. But pausing for this sort of ritual observance and, the unblemishedness of the lamb and the preparing it properly and the spreading of the blood, it doesn't necessarily if you are somebody who just wants to get the things done, pausing to ritualize this experience seems like a little bit of a unnecessary step, or right. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I just thinking about the importance of making sure you observe a ritual in this moment of urgency. There's a way of thinking maybe rituals are not that important in times of urgency. Mm-hmm. This text seems to be suggesting maybe they're most important in times of urgency or something like that.
Right, because it's so easy to think if this were so urgent, it would tell us why we had to do that. Yeah. But it doesn't. Yeah. It doesn't tell us that. Yeah.
Now, so when you read in other parts of the Bible about meat sacrifices being made, there's often a sense that God is in some way enjoying at least part of that offering. Yes. Yes. Here it seems like you're supposed to eat the head, the legs, and the organs. You're supposed to eat the whole thing. Yes. Is that unusual in terms of Hebrew Bible sacrifice, that the people are consuming the whole offering?
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, it reads to me like the instructions for a whole burnt offering to God, where the whole thing, the head, the legs, the entrails has to be roasted on fire, but in that case, the whole thing is given to God and you eat none of it. Yeah. And here you eat everything and none of it's given to God. You eat everything. So it's set up clearly as a ritual and with a close relationship to how sacrifice is going to look. So yeah, what does it mean to perform what seems reminiscent of a sacrifice to God, but to consume it yourself instead of God consuming it?
This sort of strikes you as a moment where you would want to be exactly sacrificing something to God, to be like, hey, right. let's get on God's good side here. But that's not what this ritual is doing.
I also see this again as almost a way for all of Israel to share a meal, even though they're all in their own households, like having these very clear instructions. The animal is slaughtered at the same time. It has to be cooked in exactly the same way, and it has to be eaten under the same, sort of rules.
Yeah.
So in terms of like the ritual formation of a people, it's like their shared experience starts pretty explicit, starts in this way before the Exodus, before the experience of walking through the water.
I love that. It's like a giant potluck.
It is in some ways. Yeah, it is. It's just, it all has to happen in their own homes, which is such a like sort of lovely overlay to have over, like as we're all in our own homes, and we can't get together for our potluck, but maybe everyone can decide to have like a hot dish at the same time.
Yeah.
Hot dish night.
Where are you from that you say hot dish?
I'm not from any place that would say hot dish, but I really like it. I've learned it from some friends of mine from the Midwest. I really, really like it. So I look for opportunities.
Yeah.
Here's the last little chunk from this chapter. This is how you shall eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord. And the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. I think the addition of the fact that, like, you're going to do all these crazy rituals, but, like, you make sure your shoes are on and your pants are buttoned is, like, such a funny, like, get ready to run out the door. Like, it seems like, it seems from the text before this that, like, we're having a big ritual meal here.
Yeah.
So you're not thinking about hurrying. It doesn't seem like a hurried thing.
Yeah.
But, in fact, it should be a hurried thing.
No, I think that's really interesting that there has to be a command here to put on gird your loins, put on your sandals, hold your staff. Like you are enacting hurriedness, even though the moment does not feel hurried. I think that's exactly right.
Right.
And, I think this is often the way that it is when momentous things are about to happen, is that you don't know that they're momentous until they have happened.
Yeah.
People are accustomed to the way of life that they have been living in Egypt, whether it's a good way of life or not a good way of life. And they're not hurried about this naturally. And so they have to be told to be hurried. I just think that's so interesting. You in the ritual, you enact the hurriedness to remind yourself that this is an urgent situation, because it doesn't necessarily appear urgent, because this thing has been going on for, what is it, like 430 years now, that Israel has been enslaved in Egypt. And it's about to end tomorrow, right? Or, the morning after this ritual.
Right.
But you don't know that in the moment.
And this is the part of the ritual that really does not carry over into Passover. Like, you're supposed to be pretty relaxed at the Seder table. You're supposed to recline. You're supposed to have a pillow on your seat because you are free. Like, that's the point where it recognizes the difference between their situation and our situation.
That's so interesting, because what I was thinking was, wow, what a useful thing for people in our situation, in which we are in crises that maybe we have become comfortable with those crises. Like, we have settled into our own versions of slavery to the pharaohs of our world. And if we would have a ritual where we would have to put on our running shoes and have our car keys in our hands while we did this ritual, like, it might be good for us to remember what it's like to be hurried.
Yeah. And gosh, even just like translating it into modern terms and saying, like, put on your running shoes and have your car keys in your hand, like, again, I think really underscores the tension of do this elaborate thing, this meal that you don't really know why you're doing it, but also be ready to run.
As we were talking a minute ago about there can be a perception that sort of ritual and urgency are not, like, if you're feeling urgent, why would you do ritual?
You can skip the ritual, right?
But here's a ritualization of urgency, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah,
you're taking the time to acknowledge that this is a moment where time is of the essence. That's so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I really love that.
So I mentioned before this issue of who is it who is passing through the land, because you were referring to the angel of death, and you are certainly correct that other places in the Tanakh, it says it is the destroyer who will be passing through, some kind of angel of death. But here in verse 12, it is pretty explicit that it's God who's going to do it. And you'd think God knows where Israel lives by now, but God would still like the shorthand of the blood on the door.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it doesn't actually say this is a sign for God so that God knows you. I mean, it's a little murky there. It says in verse 13, the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. So the sign is for the people, but
unless it's a sign on your behalf.
Is that how you read that?
I struggled with the same thing. First, I was like, what do you mean a sign for me? I don't need a sign. And that's how I made sense of it.
Yeah.
But go down the other road. Let's see.
Because the other road would be something like God doesn't need a sign to know where you live, but you need a sign in order to know that God's not going to cause harm to you where you live. And so the blood on the door is a comfort for you to know that you're covered, even though God was going to cover you anyway. Now, I don't know that, like, that makes sense of the other part of the text that your way of reading it doesn't quite make sense of, but it doesn't make sense of the bit where God says, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Yeah. If God was going to pass over anyway.
Yeah, again, like, I think that's an allowance that we should make for ritual. Like, ritual is pretty intentional about not being so explicit about why rituals happen. But I do think there's something powerful in everyone in a community sort of marking. Yeah. There's something powerful for the members of the community, of everyone within the community marking their home. Yeah. In a certain way. Like, it reminds me a little bit of around Easter time this year, there were a lot of folks in my neighborhood who put these beautiful, like, chalk drawings in their driveway of crosses that looked like stained glass. And I just thought it was such a lovely, marking of being a part of a community.
No, I love that. The sort of, when we all mark ourselves in the same way, it creates community identity.
It's like matching pajamas. They should have had matching pajamas. That's what the Israelites should have had. Okay, continue.
I was also wondering if there's any risk to the marking of one's door. I mean, I guess Pharaoh knows you're an Israelite anyway, but we're in a competition between gods here, right? Like the God of Israel versus Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt. And so when you mark your door with blood, you are marking your loyalties. I am loyal to the God of Israel and not to the gods of Pharaoh. The text doesn't really it doesn't really take us down that road of like the public, but there's like the public marking of oneself as belonging to God seems significant to me.
Yes. No, I agree with you.
And especially since a few chapters earlier, the people don't seem to remember who the God of Israel is exactly.
Right. Yeah, they're still kind of being introduced here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's been 400 years and they have sort of like, so it's
so
significant.
It's asking them to stake a claim, like to,
yeah,
pretty publicly. Mm-hmm.
Here's an impossible question. You like to ask impossible questions, so here's mine. If you imagine an Israelite family, I don't know, they just didn't put blood on their door. Like, they were having an off day. They didn't buy into this whole thing. They just didn't want to do it. For whatever reason. Does God pass by them anyway? Or does God enact the punishment of the Egyptians onto this Israelite family who doesn't mark their door?
I think God passes by them anyway. Oh, here's an answer. Ready? Okay. God passes by them anyway, but they do not have the courage to walk through the water because they haven't taken these incremental steps towards the development of like faith and peoplehood.
Yeah.
And so their first big step is too big. And so they perish at the shore
I did not see that coming.
Reed Sea.
Yeah. I had a set of possible answers that you were going to answer, and that was not one of them.
That was not one of them.
Yeah. They survive the Passover, but they die at the Red Sea. That's so amazing. But I appreciate what you're saying about the ritual. Like, ritual forms people, and if you don't do the rituals, you are not formed in the ways that are necessary for the living of life. And
Yeah.
so why do you pause to do ritual at this moment, which is a question we've kind of been asking. I think that's a really nice answer. The ritual forms you so that you're able to do the things.
So you're prepared to do the harder stuff.
Yeah.
This ritual is a little hard or weird, but it's sort of like once you've started doing it, it changes how you see yourself and how you see your relationship to God and how you see your relationship to the people in some way.
I mean, it's like going to the gym. It's like strength training in some way. Like the
Mhm.
ritual, like puts you through the paces of doing the things that you need to do in order to get stronger. I really like that. I probably want to think more about that, but I like that. I'm sad that they died at the shores of the Red Sea because they didn't do it. Like,
yeah, it is, and we won't go down this road because we could talk about it for hours. But if you think about the way that ritual is involved in politics and sort of the show of politics in our society, there are a lot of ways in which the ritual itself seems sort of low stakes, like, saluting the flag, which maybe that doesn't feel low stakes to people at this moment in history, but that in and of itself, the ritual seems harmless. But it carries some messages in it about how things are related to each other and what the power structures in the world are and who your people are that can have big payoffs. I guess that's the right word later.
Yeah.
Okay. We've talked a lot about chapter 12. Chapter 12 is great.
Wait. We can't.
We're not done. We're going to talk more about chapter 12. Yes. What
I mean, so the core of this text is that God is killing the firstborn of Egypt. And I feel like there is one can read this text as sort of like triumph over evil, but there is also a human cost in this text that happens. It sort of happens between here and the next text we're going to read, right? Like, it narrates the actual events. But the whole point here is that God is going to kill the firstborn Egyptians, both human and animal. And like, this is an act of pretty horrific violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just curious, like, I feel like it's easy to kind of slip past that in terms of reading this text, but
not if you're reading with you. I tried.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what you do. I don't know what one does with that exactly, but this text is sort of, it's concealing behind this God's going to save us from Egypt. It's sort of like concealing this, the cost.
Right.
The
God's
cost
going to do something really horrible
high in terms of human life.
The households of Egypt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any ways of sort of making sense of that, or just notice that it's there and move on?
I guess I have two thoughts. One is related to the idea of like the angel of death, the destroyer, versus God doing this, God's self. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Monotheism gets messy. If you only have one God who has to do everything, that God's proverbial hands are going to get dirty.
Yeah.
So that's one sort of piece of it. And the other thing that comes to mind immediately is just that, during the reenactment of this now, during the Passover Seder, again, there's a ritual designed for removing wine from the wine glass because the wine brings us joy, and we remove drops of wine from the glass as we remember the plagues because they diminish our joy, and we remember the suffering of the Egyptian people. Now, this doesn't, that's nice that you take some wine out of your glass and acknowledge that this thing happened. But you're right. I mean, the killing of the firstborn is horrific. It's horrific.
There's something here about the cost of the Pharaoh's economic system has been high. And, Pharaoh imprisoned and enslaved and forced to labor Israelite people and practiced the killing of Israelite children, not just the firstborn. I mean, we don't know what actually happened, right? But that was Pharaoh's command anyway, according to the biblical text, is kill all the male Israelite children.
Mm-hmm.
And, this system is dug in. And so one way of reading what's happening here is that liberation has a cost, and it doesn't come without there being some sort of pain for the people who are in charge.
Oppressors. Yeah.
And, here, it seems different to me to say, I'm going to exact revenge against Pharaoh. Like one way of
Right.
reading it is to say, look,
Right.
Pharaoh killed my children, so I'm going to kill Pharaoh's children.
Right.
But like Joe Egyptian, who doesn't have any stake in the power systems of Pharaoh and nonetheless is a victim of this.
Yeah.
And, there's not any way for me to read it in which God comes off looking particularly good.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a way of reading it in which you say the average people get caught up under the systems of the pharaohs, and the destruction of those systems has costs for them too. And it's true for us as well. Like we get caught up in these systems that oppress other people. And, we're not in charge of those systems, but we are part of those systems. And it's going to be painful when those systems need to be ended so that liberation can take place. And so, God doesn't come off looking any better to me, but it is pointing to a reality that the liberation from oppressive systems have a real cost in terms of human life. And those costs are often for people who appear innocent, but were caught up in a system from which they benefited, but for which they were not directly responsible.
Often when I encounter a biblical text that is really distressing to me because I feel like the Bible should represent things as it ought to be, and I don't like the message, I don't like the idea that the Bible says like, these things happen. Look, it happened here.
Yeah.
One thing to do with that is to go into the world and say, well, where is this happening now?
Yeah.
Because we become numb to what's happening now and we just sort of get used to it. But seeing it in this holy scripture, it's offensive. You know? And so if we're offended by it in this text, then it can push us back into our world. And I think you're right, sort of underscore that hypocrisy in our own minds, that we don't want to see it in the biblical text, but it actually happens all over.
Yeah, I like that way of talking about it. So the biblical text often exposes things that are wrong with our world by the things that it calls attention to that we think are problematic in the text itself. Yeah. So the Bible doesn't always represent things the way they should be, but it exposes the way that things are.
Okay. We are going to move now into chapter 13. The Lord spoke further to Moses, saying, "Consecrate to me every firstborn, man and beast. The first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine." And Moses said to the people, "Remember this day on which you went free from Egypt, the house of bondage, how the Lord freed you from it with a mighty hand. No leavened bread shall be eaten. You go free on this day in the month of Aviv." So this goes back to that firstborn idea here.
Yeah.
What do you think this means? What does this mean? Consecrate to me every firstborn.
No, I mean, it's such an interesting thing. And we've been talking about the firstborn of the Egyptians, and then here the firstborn of the Israelites come back into play, and God has a claim on them.
Mm-hmm.
And, the way that I read that is God has a claim on the first of all the things. And so you offer your first fruits to God, you offer the firstborn of your animals to God, and the firstborn of your children also belongs to God. And, the way that I tend to have read that is to say one can sort of redeem, you can redeem your firstborn by making an offering to God that stands in for your firstborn child. But you owe something, like God has a claim on that child that needs to be settled. So that's kind of where I get to with that. But what do you think about that?
What this really got me thinking about first was actually going back to the story of Abraham. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and how this long drama unfolds, and it's drawn out as long as it can be about Abraham having an heir, a biological heir. And even after Isaac is born, like first there's, he gets older and older and he's not having any children. So he says, "What's up, God?" And then he does have a child, but it's not with his wife, Sarah. It's with Hagar. And so, that's Ishmael. And then we learn Ishmael is not going to be the heir that we're talking about. And then he has Isaac. And then what does God do? He says, "Go sacrifice Isaac."
Yeah.
Right? Again, which thankfully, does not actually have to happen. God says, "Just kidding, don't do that." But it's this idea that, like, you've wanted this one thing for so long, and you sort of like, you have to hang in there with God at least until you get it. Like, you might as well keep playing before you have any winnings, right? But then once you have the quote unquote winnings, once you have your firstborn, it's tempting to say like, well, I'm leaving the game. Like,
Yeah.
I got what I wanted. And this is a way of saying that no, like the first one still belongs to God. And you have to keep playing. Like you have to stay in the game.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. So the firstborn is the thing that you most desire, and God has a claim on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to recognize that. You have to recognize that claim. I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I think is really interesting in this text is that command to remember. So between where we just read and now where we are in chapter 13 has actually been the night where the firstborn are killed, and then the Egyptians send the Israelites out. And kind of in the midst of that is this command, like, remember this thing that is happening to you right now, which is so interesting to me because, like, I mean, how could you not remember this, right? But also that sort of like pausing in the middle of a thing to say, make sure you remember this thing. I just find that command, like, there has been this urgency. There, like, it is a crazy day, right? Liberation is happening all of a sudden, and this command toward memory seems really important to me. Do you make anything out of that?
It's really interesting to think about it from the perspective of the people who are in the moment, because I tend to encounter that sort of as a modern reader of this text for whom the retelling of this story is so central to the ongoing sort of formation and connection of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And so much of the Passover ritual is designed around how are we going to remember? What can we do to help us remember? Is sort of around that imperative. But you're right, for the people in the moment, it is a little bit of a strange thing to say, remember this.
It reminds me a little bit of, in these days of pandemic, and people keep saying, make sure you keep a journal, which I have not been doing.
Right.
But so that people, not just, well, so that people in the future will know what it was like, but also a little bit so that you can process your experience, because this thing that is happening is a new thing and we don't have categories for this. And I wonder if that command is sort of similar here, like, make sure that you're paying attention because you're going to be responsible in the future for communicating what the significance of this day to your children and their children and their children all the way down to today. And if you don't pay attention and remember, then this communal memory is never going to get started.
I also think it can be profound to sort of pause and step out of the moment when you're in a moment that's probably really scary.
Yeah.
Where you tend to just be focused on what's the next thing I need to do to survive.
Yeah.
It's sort of an acknowledgement that, like, this is only going to happen once.
Yeah.
Like, you're only going to have to do this once, and you're only going to get to do this once.
Yeah.
Which does, I mean, I know in the challenging days of raising babies, people always say, like, remember this time. And I was like, oh my God, shut up. I haven't slept in 5 days. Like, stop telling me to remember this time. But it's both. It's you won't have to do it again, and you won't get to do it again.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, picking up at verse 5. So when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall observe in this month the following practice. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a festival of the Lord. Throughout the 7 days unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in all your territory. And you shall explain to your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. So we have here, it's going to tell us the observance of this remembrance in the future. But before we get to that, there's verse 5 that tells us about the land that they're about to go into that has been sworn to their fathers. How do you think about that verse and how it sort of leads us into what comes next?
I mean, you know me. That verse is really deeply troubling to me because it names this land to which that God has sworn to your fathers, and then it names the people who are currently living there.
Yeah.
who, like, it is anticipating the occupation, or however you want to think about that, the conquest of the land, to use terminology used for Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
And so I struggle because on the one hand, there's this promise that we've seen made all the way back in Genesis chapter 12, which is about to come to fulfillment. And you have this sense of the Israelite people are finally about to make their homecoming, and this is a momentous event. And at the same time, there are these other people who have nothing to do with this story, really, whose land that is at this moment, and they're about to be displaced from that land. And so to me, there's this real tension there. The text does not acknowledge, like, the text doesn't want us to think about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The text just wants us to cruise on by.
Yeah.
But it's troubling to me. Like, I have trouble cruising on by.
Yeah.
By that point. Do you have any help for thinking about that?
I mean, I think the best I can do, again, is to look at to see this in the biblical text and say, like, why do you have to displace other peoples in order to have a land that is yours, where you can be, safe from?
Yeah.
The Israelites are not in a safe place. They need to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be nice if it were a land that had not already been claimed by other peoples?
Yeah.
And so the best I can do is to, again, sort of look at all the things throughout history and through this day where peoples were in a place and were displaced by some other group, and the ways in which we are numb to so much of it. I mean, even in our own country.
Oh, yeah.
That it's so easy to sort of overlook that, but be offended by it in the biblical text.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, to look at, like, what do we owe? I mean, maybe that got a little pointed there, more pointed than I meant for it to be. But, like, what does it mean for us as people who are in a land that used to belong to a people who's been displaced?
I think that's exactly the right, like, yeah, I don't think that's pointed. I mean, it is pointed, but I don't think it's inappropriately pointed. This text is kind of thinking about moving into a land that is ours and not taking into account the cost of people who are already there. And this text gets repeated, as you're saying, throughout history. And, as European settlers in North America, like, this text is about us too. And we celebrate the freedoms of the land to which we have come. But oftentimes the discourse about indigenous peoples who were here before us gets submerged. Yeah. And so one of the reasons that I want to point to this part of this text is because if you don't point to it here, it makes it easier to not point to it now.
You're
too.
Right.
And so we need to be pointing to both of those things, absolutely, and to realize that the cost of there is a cost of this liberation.
Yeah.
But I take your point, and I think it's a good one, that the Israelites are fleeing an oppressive system, and they need a place to go. And this is a place to go. Like, they need liberation. So just for us to keep in mind the God of liberation and the God of occupation are two sides of the same God and two sides of the same kind of event. And I don't think there's any simple solutions to that. But in the moment of celebration, one also needs to keep in mind the cost of that celebration for other people.
Yeah. I think it's a little weird that the primary, like, ritual mechanism for remembering this epic travel into freedom here is matzah. You're gonna eat matzah.
Yeah.
Of all the things, like, why don't they say you're gonna walk through a big puddle?
Yeah.
That wouldn't be very grand either. I don't know, like, that's a strange thing to pull out for me. Of all the things, we're gonna hold on to that bread.
Yeah.
Seemed a little incidental in the moment. What do you think about ritualizing this moment in the particular way that's described here?
I don't know for sure the significance of unleavened bread. In my own mind, it recalls a little bit a time of urgency when there wasn't the time to let your bread rise. And so in that way, that, like, eat this meal with your clothes on and your sandals on and your staff in your hand. Like, in my mind, this is a little bit of a similar thing, to remember that there was this kind of urgency, and we're gonna model that, or we're gonna remember that, reenact that through this unleavened bread.
Yeah, it is interesting that they pull out exactly what you've underscored before, this sort of intersection of urgency and ritual.
So you're ritualizing the urgency of a past moment.
Yeah. And the other thing I would pull out from this is this line in verse 8 that you will explain to your child on that day. It is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss not to underscore here the use of the first person singular. What the Lord did for me. Not even what the Lord did for us or our people, or it's very, very personal and direct.
No, I think that's really interesting, the singularity there. And the other thing that I was thinking about is that, actually by the time they do get into the land, although the text has not anticipated this yet, but it's not actually the people who experience the Exodus.
That's right.
Who are the ones that are going to be telling the story in the land, because that whole generation dies. And so from the first telling in the land until today, it is people who did not directly experience the Exodus who are telling the story of what happened to me in the Exodus. Mm-hmm. And it sort of connects that. We were talking last year about all Jews were at Sinai. Mm-hmm. And I think this is sort of a similar thing where it is as though the whole people, like all generations of the Jewish people, did experience this directly. Mm-hmm. And so you can talk about it as something that happened to me, even though it happened, 3,500 years ago.
Yes.
I think that's really powerful and important. And part of what ritual does is it connects us through the generations to all the people in between, but also to the original events. In the case of this text, to the Passover, and I think the parallel in the Christian tradition is probably to the Last Supper that Jesus shares with his disciples, which in its own way it is a Passover meal in the biblical text. And so Christians are connected to that meal, and through that meal then to the Passover itself.
Okay, so we have already, I feel like throughout our conversation, brought in many different ways that this text might sit with our community is really profoundly right now. If you wanted to underscore just one of them, is there one that rises to the top for you?
I think the thing that's coming to mind for me is this idea that in this text, the world is in a revolution. Things are different. And to the extent that we talked about at the very beginning, like we need to restart the calendar because this thing is going to be so big.
Yeah.
But in that moment, the people don't necessarily realize it yet, right? When we start out in chapter 12, they have to be told, like, this is going to be the new calendar for you. They have to be told, like, wear your sandals and carry your staff, like, put on your shoes and get your car keys. And so there is this sense in which the world is changing, but people are not prepared for the world to change. Even though the change that is coming is going to be a change of liberation for the people, they have gotten so accustomed to the world being the way that the world has been under Pharaoh for 430 years that they are not prepared to suddenly have the world be different. And so the ritual is preparing them in this interesting kind of way. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder in our own time if something similar is afoot. Maybe something similar is kind of always afoot, where God is trying to upend systems of oppression and people need to be prepared for that and reminded about that and given a sense of urgency. And especially for people who are positioned in society in a way like I am. Like, I'm pretty comfortable in the world the way that it works under present pharaohs.
Yeah.
And so as a person who wants to identify in this text with the Israelites who have been oppressed and enslaved for centuries, like that's not my natural kind of social position in this text. And so I think there's a particular lack of urgency for somebody like me for whom the system works just fine.
Right.
So I think this text in a really interesting way is kind of speaking a word to me about remembering, like, even though the Israelites are not connected to me as a Christian in the same way that they're connected to people who are Jewish, like their story is part of the story that I claim. But it is an odd claim for someone like me who doesn't come through that lineage. And so part of the work of this text, I think, for a Christian reader like myself, is to say, look, there are these rituals that connect us with the oppression of our past, which may not actually be an oppression that I experienced, but is nonetheless an oppression that is part of my story. And I need to do this ritual work to connect with that experience, both of being oppressed and also of being liberated. And I need to do it in a way that pulls me out of this kind of worldview of Pharaoh that, puts food on my table every night and gives me a sense of urgency that the world needs to change, and needs to change in a way that resets the calendar, right? And, it's kind of a difficult thing for me to kind of get my head around, that this sort of ritual reenactment is like, it really is trying to connect me to something urgently important and a liberation that needs to take place in our own time and space. That is not maybe my natural inclination. So I feel very compelled by this text and sort of like called out of my complacency about the way things are to reimagine and reenact and retell the story that the world could in fact and should in fact maybe be different than it is.
That's really beautiful. I love that. And I love especially the way that you pull it into the way in which things seem particularly upended right now and unsettled, and sort of the questions that arises for us, but also the fact that we may feel urgency, but urgency to do what? We have no idea. Right. Like we don't, like we all feel like we're waiting. We're in this waiting period. But the idea of seeing it as a period leading up to great possibilities for liberation, I think is really powerful. I really like that reading a lot.
Yeah.
My concluding thought for this moment is similar, and just leaning a little more towards the ritual side, and the ways in which, it's really easy as a modern person, especially to a modern Western person, I don't know, as whoever I am, my multiple identities, to kind of poo-poo ritual and say, like, I don't have time to do this thing. I don't feel like doing these rituals, and I can't see any direct reason that I should do them. But I do think that, especially over time, maybe not in a singular ritual event, but I think over time, ritual really does change how we relate to each other and how we relate to power structures if we're intentional about the rituals we observe and how we do it, and how we relate to God in ways that prepare us for we don't know what. We don't know what we're preparing for. And so for me to sit back and say, like, well, I don't really need to do this Shabbat ritual because I'm tired. Like, is I feel that I should be more attentive to those things. I think there's real potential in there for the formation of ourselves and our communities across time that merit more attention than they often get in our culture.
And sort of putting those two thoughts together, the sort of the ritual preparation for the upending of the world, like that seems pretty urgently important.
That's the title of this episode.
Yeah. And so complacency about the upending of the world and complacency about ritual, like those two things might be related. Yeah. And so the practicing of ritual might actually prepare us to imagine and enact a different kind of a world.
So do you think we got to that one thing you were thinking that was really important?
Yeah, it was it was a bit about putting on your shoes and your car keys before.
Oh, we did get to it. Yeah. Yay! Success.
We did. I don't know. I wasn't entirely clear how earth-shattering it was when we actually got to it, but that was what it was.
It doesn't matter. We won the game. It's like we won the game. Yeah. That's good. I'll take a success for today.
Yeah.
Well, it is always a pleasure discussing these texts with you, Bobby, and I will see you again soon.
Next time, we're going to be in Exodus 32 with the story of Aaron and the golden calf.
It's a good story.
It's a good one. All right, Amy, I'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this special extended episode of BibleWorm. If you'd like to get access to extended episodes every week, just join our Patreon at the Extended Worm level or higher. You'll also find other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more, starting at just $4 per month. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
We're grateful to all our supporters for helping us keep the podcast going. A special thank you to our executive producer, Fox Valley Presbyterian Church in Geneva, Illinois, And to our newest supporters, Stephen Bond, Scott Hooker, Valerie Ritter, Sharon Janet, Jennifer Boyd, Will Christian, Bob Stevie, and Amy Epp.
Join us again next week when we'll be discussing the story of the golden calf in Exodus 32. Until then, keep on digging.